Good day. Welcome to Rockland Talk Radio. RocklandTalkRadio.com, produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Robeson Oil, the house that service built, by Michael Labriola, landscape design and construction of Armonk. Over in Westchester, they cover the entire Hudson Valley, by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard up and down and all through the Hudson Valley, and by Jaguar Land Rover. They're throughout the Hudson Valley, and they're in New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco over in Westchester, too. If you want to take a hop across the river. Here, on the Cup of Joe political show, I'm John Marino, and we are joined by Assemblyman Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler represents the 97th Assembly District here in Rockland County, which covers Clarkstown, Orangetown, and Ramapo. And ensconced within this area are places like the Nyack, Spring Valley, Nanuet, Suffern, also Sparkill, Pearl River, and so many more. Mike Lawler joining us here today on the Cup of Joe political show on Rockland Talk Radio. Mike Lawler, you are running for re-election in your assembly district in Rockland County, and the general election is going to be in November. This whole situation with redistricting, though, and the way things have worked out, it seems like a big fiasco created by Governor Hochul and the Democrats, which a special master has to work out. Your assembly race, the primary for that, for all assembly races, I guess, is still in late June, correct?
Yes, as of right now, the statewide and assembly primary day will be June 28th. I do not have an assembly primary. But for those assembly members across the state that do, it would be June 28th, and the Senate and congressional primaries would be August 23rd.
Any idea how, when the special master finally issues a decree, how this might work out?
Well, the assembly maps are going to stay the same as of now. The judge ruled that the lawsuit against the assembly maps, those that brought it could not intervene in the case. So they would have to bring a separate action. But the congressional and Senate maps are going to be drawn by the special master. We should have them by May 20th. And I think what we will see is fair maps that are drawn not by politicians, but by somebody who's going to look at the data, look at communities of interest, and make reasonable, fair districts that are competitive, that allow voters a choice rather than the politicians choosing their voters and thereby getting elected.
The Democrats overplay their hand with this, knowing that the appeals court is made up of Janet DeFiore, the one-time Westchester DA, all 7 members on the court, appointed by Democratic governors. Did Democratic politicians in this state decide that there's no way that this could be thrown out because it's our people that are running the courts, and yet the courts still want to be seen to be as fair as possible, I think?
1,000%. This was an absolute arrogance of power, one-party rule out of control. Governor Hochul said when she took office that she was going to use the redistricting process to help Democrats nationally ensure that they hold on to the House of Representatives, and they overplayed their hand. And went so far that they violated the state constitution, both in terms of process and intent to gerrymander. And a Democrat-appointed Court of Appeals slapped them down, and rightfully so, and said, you violated the Constitution, you violated the process, and you do not get a second bite at the apple. We're going to give it to the courts and a special master to draw. And frankly, in my opinion, it was deserved.
The state budget is in the books, has been for a few weeks now. Your thoughts on that? A big budget, $220 billion for New York State. And in that, talk about the seeming non-reform of 2019's bail reform.
Well, it's certainly a fiscal calamity in the making. $220 billion, in my opinion, is woefully over budget. We are going to be losing federal tax dollars next year as a result of the COVID relief monies going away. And rather than get our fiscal house in order, my colleagues in the majority and the governor chose to spend like drunken sailors. And Governor Hochul spending $600 million on stadium deal that has been labeled the worst stadium deal ever negotiated by pundits across the country who have evaluated stadium deals for sports teams. The amount of money that we spend on every program under the sun really puts us in grave fiscal jeopardy here. We have $291 billion in outstanding debt. And rather than focus on paying down some of that debt, focus on getting our fiscal house in order, we are spending money that we ultimately don't have. And I'm very concerned for next year when the federal dollars do run out, that we're going to have a problem. With respect to bail reform, Governor Hochul put forth a 10-point plan that was half-baked, and the Democrats in the majority watered it down to the point where it really didn't do much of anything. Other than them being able to say they did something on it. But I think it's clear that if we are going to address the problems facing New York City, facing communities all across this state, we need a overhaul of the criminal justice system. And it starts with bail reform. It goes to raise the age. We need to look at how we are policing. Mayor Adams has brought back in some form the anti-crime unit. I think the reality is we need to get plainclothes cops back on the streets to get these illegal guns off of them. And there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I think my colleagues need to wake up, because many of the people in their communities are the ones who are being hurt the most by these policies.
Even Buffalo area voters have turned a thumbs down on this new stadium for the Bills. Should Governor Hochul have been allowed to remove Brian Benjamin from the ballot as her running mate in light of Brian Benjamin now being charged with corruption? And she makes the move she gets Amy Pollin, or maybe Amy Pollin of Scarsdale Assemblywoman did this over in Westchester on her own, put the bill together to get Brian Benjamin out, and met some resistance in the state Senate, even from Yonkers. Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the state Senate majority leader, who was supposed to be an ally of Hochul. Finally, it was done. Antonio Delgado, Dutchess County and Mid-Hudson and Upper Hudson Valley congressman, has been selected to be the new lieutenant governor. You seemingly seem to think that Governor Hochul made her bed with Brian Benjamin and she should lie in it.
Well, listen, she chose poorly and she should have had to suffer the consequences for that poor choice. The allegations against Brian Benjamin were already out there well before she chose him as her lieutenant governor. And I think it's unfortunate that in an election year, the Democrats tried to change the rules in the middle of the game. We all have to work within the election law. And while I think removing somebody from the ballot because of a criminal indictment certainly is a reasonable policy position, I think that is something that should have applied to future elections. You can't change the rules in the middle of the game when there were already two Democratic candidates on the ballot, in addition to Brian Benjamin, for lieutenant governor. The fact that Kathy Hochul wouldn't have had a lieutenant governor candidate of her own, well, that's just unfortunate for her, but it was due to a problem of her own making. So I think in reality here, it was wrong for my colleagues to pass that bill in the middle of an election. I put forth an amendment, a hostile amendment that would have made the effective date January 1st, 2023, because like I said, I agree with the overall policy idea, but doing it in the middle of an election is wrong. And we all know if the shoe was on the other foot, and this was a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor who found themselves in this situation, there's not a chance in hell this bill would have seen the light of day.
Rockland County Assemblyman Mike Lawler, 97th District. He represents here on Rockland Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. The Biden administration, as documented by Rob Astorino, one-time Westchester County executive 2014 Republican candidate for governor. His hat is in the ring for the Republican nomination again this year. You have worked with and for Rob Astorino. He has documented since last summer the Biden administration sending illegal migrants up here to Westchester County Airport. A lot of light shed on that. That stopped for a few months. They're back to doing it again. Why would they take this kind of a chance?
Well, it's really unfortunate on two levels. Obviously, we are a nation of immigrants. We want immigrants to come to this country, but we want them to come here legally. And we want there to be a orderly process by which people go through. The Biden administration not only is failing to address the border crisis that we're seeing every day, but they are bringing undocumented immigrants from the border and dropping them off in communities all across the country, including right here in New York State. And it puts a burden on our state taxpayers, our local municipalities, to have to provide for these individuals. And I think it's wrong. I think, again, we want people to come here, but we want them to come here through a process, and we want them to come here legally. And the fact that the government is doing these secret midnight flights to drop people off into communities across New York State without taxpayers having really any information is wrong. And it should be stopped. And the governor and the state have failed to stand up for our residents and our taxpayers by allowing this to continue.
How do you react to a story that's out there now about we see a warehouse down in South Texas filled with baby formula for migrant kids who we do have to take care of, and yet children across America can't get what they need?
Well, right now, my wife and I are living this experience. We have a 3-week-old baby. And so we understand, like many families, the struggle and the challenge that they're going through trying to secure formula. Obviously, the Biden administration, once again, has been woefully ill prepared to deal with some of these supply chain issues, to deal with product shortages, including, obviously, baby formula. And, baby formula is something that can't really be replaced or watered down. You really need a certain type of product. So I think it's incumbent upon the administration to react immediately and work with manufacturers across this country to create the supply that we need. It is critically important for families. And, look, we have a responsibility to take care of people who are here. So I'm not going to attack the idea of, young children having formula, but we really need to get our priorities straight, and we really need to make sure that we address the immigration challenges, the economic challenges that we are facing, and it requires leadership. It requires people doing the right thing, doing it fairly, but putting in place policies that seek to protect Americans and seek to ensure our communities are kept safe. And that taxpayers in this country are prioritized over those who come here illegally.
Should New York State taxpayers foot the bill for Governor Hochul's new plan to provide abortions for out-of-state women and migrant women in New York State if indeed Roe v. Wade turns into a situation where the decision about whether abortions will be legal or not becomes a state-by-state basis?
Well, let's be clear. Regardless of how the Supreme Court decides on that particular case, abortion will be legal in the state of New York up to the day of birth. A law that was passed in 2019 by the Democratic majorities and signed into law by Governor Cuomo allowed abortion up to the day of birth. It allowed non-doctors to perform abortion. So women in the state of New York will have access to reproductive health, regardless of what decision is made at a federal level. I think the idea, though, that Governor Hochul wants to make New York the abortion capital of America and wants to use taxpayer money to fund out-of-state abortions is illogical. And frankly, it's an abuse of taxpayer monies. And I don't think ultimately it is the way to address the concerns that folks may have based on that Supreme Court ruling that may or may not go into effect, depending on what the final ruling is. I think each state needs to make up the policies that are best for that state and based on what voters in those states want. As I said, in New York State, abortion is legal. It is not going anywhere. And I think anybody trying to indicate that it is or that it is in jeopardy of going somewhere is using that for political purposes.
Do you foresee the day coming maybe soon where the name Cuomo is removed from the bridge that connects Westchester and Rockland so we can just call it the Tappan Zee again?
I think it will happen. It may require a Republican governor to get it done, but I certainly am going to continue to push. We've made significant progress this year, getting many of my colleagues to join in support of this legislation from both sides of the aisle. And we're going to keep pushing. I think it is long past due time to revert the name back to the Tappan Zee Bridge. Everybody continues to call it that, no matter where they are, in Rockland or Westchester or
in California too.
People still call it the Tappan Zee Bridge, and we're going to fight until we finally get across the finish line on that.
You're running for re-election. What does Albany need now that you can bring?
Well, I think Albany needs balance. One party rule does not work. I don't care whether it's Republican or Democrat. One party rule is just not good for the way our system is set up. It's a system of checks and balances. It requires opposition. It requires people speaking out, raising questions, debating the bills, so that we get better legislation, so that we find compromise and common ground. And I think, unfortunately, so much of what goes on in Albany is groupthink and one-party dominance, and it's not serving the people of New York well. So what I bring to the table is this. I work 24/7. My office works tirelessly to represent our community, serve our constituents, but I make the public aware of many of the issues going on in Albany in a way that, frankly, many of my Democratic colleagues don't, because they don't want the public to be aware of some of the votes that they're taking or some of the issues that are being rammed through in Albany. And it's critically important that we have people in government who will speak out, who will take tough positions, and who will debate the bills and raise questions about what is going on and the decisions that are being made by those in the majority and in the governor's office.
Mike Lawler, all the best to you, 97th District Assemblyman, in your re-election bid. And let's talk again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We thank you, Mike Lawler, Assemblyman representing the 97th Assembly District here in Rockland County. In that area covering Clarkstown, Orangetown, and Ramapo, and wrapped around places like the Nyack, Spring Valley, Nanuet, Pearl River, Suffern, Sparkill, and so many more. Orangeburg, too, here on Rockland Talk Radio. And we are produced by Sharc Creative on the Cup of Joe political show, made possible by Robeson Oil, the house that Service built, by Michael Labriola, landscape design and construction of Armonk and Westchester. They work up and down the Hudson Valley by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard all through the Hudson Valley, and by Jaguar Land Rover. They're all throughout the Hudson Valley, too, right across the river in Westchester, as you know, in places like New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco. Catch all of our Rockland, Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, Orange, and Fairfield County Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.